It is Tuesday morning, St. Patrick's Day, and I'm going to film our science life in Surtsey for last week. I'll upload that, and then tomorrow night I will send you this Thursday's science reading so you can see the pictures and hear and be able to narrate. So let's get started. Remember, we're reading this book. I realize that the words are probably going to be backwards for you guys to see, but the pictures should show up just fine. So since it's been a couple of weeks, let's do a very quick review on the Surtsey reading that we had last time. Okay. We talked about the formation of Surtsey, how it all came about. So if you will pause the video and either tell yourself or tell somebody else how Surtsey, the island, came to be. Remember, we talked a lot about lava and where that came from and what it does. So try to remind yourself of what you've learned about lava either through the book or maybe the videos that we've watched. So today we're going to be reading about life on Surtsey, how it began, and about some of the specific scientists that are going to be visiting the island and working on Surtsey. And if you'll remember, at the very beginning of our book, we met young Erling, and he's going to be our main scientist that we're going to be talking about here. He's the one that saw the eruption from his bathroom window and was able to kind of watch it over the next couple of years. So here's a picture of that first hut. Remember, we saw the aerial view of the island and where the hut used to be. That hut was there for about 20 years, and then it was covered up, reclaimed by the sea, that area. So I'll begin chapter 2, Life. Since I was a tiny kid, I've always been wild, says Erling. My parents knew from the beginning where I was headed. Which isn't to say that his parents knew Erling would end up living on an uninhabited volcanic island. It's just that they knew their son was passionate about the natural world from the start. As a child, he pored over every page of every volume in the collection of Danish animal books his grandmother loaned him. His first language was Icelandic, of course, but he taught himself to read Danish in order to know what these books had to say about the lions and tigers drawn on their pages. So this is Mr. Erling reading the books that his grandmother gave him. As he got older, Erling became interested in birds, spending his free time scouring Hafnarfjörður for the migrant species that sometimes stop in Iceland. He kept notebooks detailing these exploits, eventually sharing them with the most famous bird scientist in all of Iceland. Later, around the time Surtsey was exploding out of the sea, Erling had a Danish pen pal who collected insects. The moment Erling saw his friend's pinned insect collection, he said to himself, "Ah, this is for me." He began to study insects and pinned a collection of his own. Erling puts it this way, "I'm interested in everything that breathes." In 1969, 20-year-old Erling began a formal study of everything that breathes by majoring in biology, the study of living things, at the University of Iceland. By this time, scientists had been making regular expeditions to Surtsey for several years. A hut had been built on the island, and researchers monitoring the arrival of plants and animals could now visit for days at a time. How would organisms reach Surtsey? Which ones would arrive first? Would they establish themselves permanently? Before Surtsey, scientists had had few chances to study a sterile island. Perhaps the best had been in Indonesia on the island of Krakatoa. where modern history's greatest, wildest, loudest, and most lethal volcano let loose in 1883. The eruption killed 40,000 people and, shockingly, completely obliterated the island itself. But several decades later, in 1927, an eruption in the same volcanic system formed a new island. Anak Krakatoa, which means child of Krakatoa, rose up from the ashes of the original island over the course of several years. Eventually, conditions on Anak Krakatoa were similar to what scientists would years later find on the newly formed shores of Surtsey. The island was about the same size, about the same height, about the same age, and about the same distance from other landforms. Unfortunately, scientists didn't begin studying the arrival of plants and animals on Anak Krakatoa right away. And as the climate there is warm and tropical, the establishment of plant and animal life happened very quickly. To complicate matters even further, tourists from surrounding islands and elsewhere regularly visited Anak Krakatoa, leaving behind everything from trash to stowaway insects. These are not easy conditions in which to carefully study how a brand new island becomes a home to living things. In contrast, because of Surtsey's harsh Arctic climate, plants and animals establish themselves more slowly there. A plant that manages to take root in the summertime, for example, will have to survive an Arctic winter in an exposed place in order to bloom again the following summer. Also, thanks to its designation as a nature preserve, Surtsey is protected from visiting tourists. The organisms that make it to the island are likely to have arrived on their own by natural means. Because of these advantages, Surtsey should give scientists a slow-motion view of succession and ecosystem formation. Here, scientists will be able to watch living communities slowly develop from scratch. So I want you to pause the video for a moment and to narrate to somebody what you've just heard. First, concerning Mr. Erling and his early interests and how they developed into his later interests, and then a little bit about the island of Krakatoa and Anak Krakatoa and what scientists learned about how to treat the new island of Surtsey. So you should have just narrated to someone what you just listened to. And so now I'm going to begin to read the next part. Here is a picture of seagulls that landed very early on Surtsey, probably as soon as it cooled off enough for them to be able to land and lay eggs and not burn their little web feet. The very same conditions that foster this slow colonization on Surtsey also make it a difficult place to conduct field research. Trips to the island are all but impossible in the winter, when storms and high seas in the area prevent boats and planes from reaching it safely. But in the calmer summer months, the danger and expense of transporting scientists and all their supplies to an island with very few spots to land a boat made early monitoring of the island difficult. Around the time Erling graduated from college, the organizing body for scientific research on the island, the Surtsey Research Society, decided to station field researchers there for the entire summer. They built a permanent hut so that instead of traveling back and forth to the mainland, researchers could live on Surtsey for months at a time, studying all aspects of the island's development without interruption. In order for this plan to work, though, the society needed to find someone who knew a lot about the plants, animals, and insects that might make their way to the island. They needed someone who was a fastidious observer and conscientious note-keeper, someone who wouldn't mind living on an uninhabited and barely cooled off volcanic island in the Arctic Circle for a 3-month stretch. Erling got the job. It was not easy to fall asleep the night after the idea was first proposed to me, he remembers. Not because he was nervous, mind you, but because he was ecstatic. One of my professors offered me another job as a field assistant on the island of Jan Mayen, north of Iceland. It was very tempting, but the choice was easy. Surtsey. Wow! And so on June 15th, 1970, Erling and 3 other young men, 2 to carry out plant studies and 1 to serve as their cook and communication specialist, set out on a small fishing boat, towing a rubber dinghy. Several hours later, they were standing on the shores of Surtsey, gear and dinghy piled high, watching the fishing boat head back to the mainland without them. I don't have words to describe it, Erling says, standing there on the shore for the first time, remembering that day when he first stood on a chunk of lava that few humans had stood on before, an island he would come to know as well as anyone else on Earth. He eventually finds a single word that works: home. Now, here is a picture of him on the island. So now I want you to narrate to somebody how it would be to be Mr. Erling and the thoughts that you think might be going through his head. Not the ones that were just mentioned, but maybe some other thoughts too. So this will be all that we read for this section. I did forward a video or a link to a video of a webcam on Surtsey, so you could look at that and see what life is like right now on Surtsey, pretty much at any time. I thought that might be interesting to do for the rest of the term, especially as we go from winter into spring and early summer, and to see if there are any changes, maybe flowers or birds that show up that hadn't been there when we first started looking at it. So go take a look at that sometime today. And tomorrow I will send out a video of our next lesson that we would have normally read on Thursday.